Hello. This video is the fourth episode of a series dedicated to Medtner's Night Wind Sonata. As usual, if you landed here without watching the first episode, I would suggest that you do, for you might otherwise be a little lost unless you happen to have a specific interest in the development section of the first movement of this particular sonata, which is somewhat unlikely. For the development section is what is on the menu today. This is an important part of the work. The development section is really the battleground of the sonata form, where all the ideas get a chance to be transformed, combined, pulled apart, rearranged. They may fight against each other or merge harmoniously into one another. In any case, it is a hard test of skill for a composer. This can easily be the moment where things dry up and where instead of inspiration, one gets a technical exercise in composition. One can be tempted to do too much and to go on too long. Schumann, in his first sonata I keep referring to, is a textbook example of this. Or one can be at a loose end, not knowing what to do, and go on repeating the same themes again and again, watching them lose more and more of their power with each occurrence. Tchaikovsky sometimes falls in this trap, even Bruckner. A good development will depend very much on the technical ease of the composer and on the quality of his material. By quality, I do not mean the absolute musical quality of his themes. There are some wonderful themes which make for terrible developments. Little cells, or themes which can be brought down to little cells, tend to do far better because they are more malleable and can adapt in a way melodies seldom do, though there are notable exceptions to this. In the case present, we have a composer whose technical mastery is to be ranked among the greatest, working with musical ideas which on this occasion are absolutely inspired. So the preconditions are met for things to go well. There are difficulties, however, the main one being that the exposition was already so intense, so well-rounded, that it will be difficult for the development to sustain or indeed increase the tension and to sustain the attention of the listener. At this point, I will say things up front. This development is, in my view, a bit of a mixed bag, some of it being rather weak, some of it being absolutely phenomenal. The general trend will be that the interest sags at the beginning and picks up halfway through. Another point to take note of is that, considering the length of the exposition, the number of motifs and themes we have encountered so far, and the fact that apart from the introduction themes, all of them are going to be called to play a part, the development is actually rather short or condensed. So let us dive in. If you remember, we left the end of the exposition after a long stretch of music where things were settling down, and it took a conscious effort, an act of will if you want, to shake the music out of its torpor. Conscious effort was the trick. So it does manage to rise the music again without much energy, and this outburst quickly settles. It is almost worrying. We have to summon up some energy to get things going once again. The first thing we encounter in our path is a transformation of the second subject. It is not breathtaking, but it's a good way to get things going. There, perhaps, Medtner makes the biggest error of judgment in the entire movement, and perhaps even in the whole sonata, by repeating this in a different key, but without any variation whatsoever. This is perhaps the first time since the beginning of the movement that Medtner fails to hold our attention. It is to be regretted, perhaps, that the very beginning of the development, so structurally important in a sonata, happens to be one of the weakest moments in the entire work. But we have to forgive. As I said before, composers are human and they make mistakes, even the greatest of them. From this point onward, anyway, things will only get better. At first, not so much better. And this brings me to another thing I regret very much about the beginning of this development. That is that it is very much sequence-based. Medtner treats his ideas in turn and takes care to separate them by rather too many repetitions of the little three-note motif. So the whole thing rather lacks spontaneity and fluidity. It does feel a little bit like an exercise. So next comes a transformation of the first subject, accompanied by the night wind on the left hand. Again, it is not a bad idea in itself, but Medtner has chosen to have his idea exposed twice, one soft, one loud, and then repeat it, so that in a very short space, 4 bars, we hear not 2 but 4 times this night wind motif. This is slightly tedious in my view, but the outburst, which I just played, seems to be a lot more interesting and promising. The left hand simply repeats the 3-note cell plus, and the right hand is obviously doing the wind. Then we arrive to something which is a lot more interesting. We have a phrase which is no longer simply either the first or the second theme. It is an amalgam of the 2 phrases put together. So we have first of all the second theme, the first theme, and now immediately the second one. Is very good. All this is absolutely fine. But then we have another setback. We have yet another transformation of the first theme. It is difficult not to feel a little despondent at this point. It feels like we are getting stuck on a loop and the inspiration seems to be drying up dangerously. I'll carry on. It is not bad, but we've heard all this before. After this, just when we were losing heart and thinking that nothing would happen, something does. Now this is something new and interesting. We have 2 things going on here. we have the tail end of the second subject, which is treated this time not as a Sicilian but as a jig, followed by the little motif of 6, and the phrase is repeated, but it's varied very well. So the second time we get a canon, and then the motif of 6 goes to the right hand. All this works very well. From now on, the development section has really picked up and is really going to lead us somewhere. At this point, this cell in some ways takes over, and practically everything which is going to happen in the development is going to be chromatic. So if you listen, now this is one element. The other element, which is equally remarkable, is that from this moment the bass is going to be a B up until the recapitulation. Now, of course, B in E minor is the dominant 7th. So what Medtner is trying to do is to signpost, okay, we are heading for home at the moment. And in effect, all the second half of the development is a sort of gigantic perfect cadence leading us home. Except that if the bass has decided to anchor itself on a B, nothing else on the right hand or anything else has decided to do it. So we get more and more tension between the bass, which is as firmly as possible rooted on a B, and everything else happening ever further and further away from B. So this, you will recognize this motif. You've heard it. It was one of the secondary motifs of the second subject. And again, it's taking an important role. It is the peak of the development, really the maximum point of tension, because we are in a radiant A major, which could be pure scriabine. But the bass is B. Creates a large tension. Now, as usual, Medtner will repeat his motif, and this time we are in F major, which is exactly as far from the B as we can possibly conceive. Also, we think, because with a little chromatic move, we actually get back to our E minor, and from that moment we know that the recapitulation cannot be very far. And indeed, if we listen to the left hand, we recognize the cell that we had at the beginning, which announced. So we have it this time on the dominant. Of the motif of falling 6, then just a bit. And there we are. At this point, I would like, uncharacteristically, to add something. I may have given a fairly negative impression of this important section. It is true that if we devise the development in two parts, my view is that he was much more successful in the second half than in the first. However, the quality of the ideas is only one side of the story. We also need to look at the overall architecture. And there Medtner has possibly been a master. His development starts in almost total darkness, groping for ideas, which after the ecstatic end of the exposition was really the only way to go. The music sounds as though it is searching for something it has lost, which gives psychological meaning to the fact that it is not compelling to listen to. It then finds a path, and the whole thing is heading ever faster towards the exposition, like an object dropped from a height will increase its acceleration because of the force of gravity. The force of gravity here is the B. So you might say, I have here given you two possible views about this section. One is that Medtner had some problems of inspiration and had great difficulties getting the first half of his development on its feet. The second possibility is that the relative tediousness of the first half is actually a psychological need at this point in time in the music, and that Medtner deliberately didn't write something more compelling because the music needed to be directionless at this moment in time. You are free to form your own opinion. I personally believe the truth to be somewhere in the middle. If you have a different opinion on this, please feel free to share it. Thanks for watching.